Thank you very much, Lisa. What can I say? Maybe I'm privileged to come and address such a distinguished audience, but I have been several times here with Al Jazeera and many other debates. It has been a long time since I've been here. Last year I was here, but it gives me great privilege to accept the invitation of Lisa and to come and speak to you at a time when it is so critical in the context of the Arab-Israeli conflict, let alone the Palestinians, and what's happening today in the Middle East in general, something phenomenal that we have not witnessed for the last decades. So my talk is going to be very short, 30 minutes, and then we'll take questions and answers. If you ask me today a very direct and simple question, where are we, Palestinians and Israelis, in this peace process? My answer is very simple. As I had said, Sir David Frost, when he interviewed me before he died, before he passed away, I told him, Sir David, today Palestinians and Israelis are stuck between the historically inevitable and the politically impossible. So just think about that for a moment, and you can visualize what I'm going to talk about now. First of all, let me start by saying that this conflict is a protracted conflict. It's not a simple conflict. It's a much more complex conflict than everybody thinks about. Why it is a protracted conflict? Because it's a conflict between two epistemic communities that have been fighting each other for the last 100 years. And why I say epistemic communities? For the simple fact that this conflict is between two nationalisms that have come across at loggerheads from the 19th century, carrying on till the 21st century. And why we call it protracted? Protracted, it goes beyond the conflict of territoriality. It had many other dimensions, and the most acute one is the psychological dimension, which analysts, politicians, and even second-track diplomats, they don't take into consideration. They don't factor in these factors that are considered to be very important in finding plausible solutions to such conflicts. This conflict has been molded by two factors. The first factor is mutual distrust, and the second factor is mutual fear. So if we take these two factors into consideration, we can understand exactly why it is so complex. Now, this is not a lecture in conflict management for you, although that's my background. But I think this kind of an introduction is important for you to understand why this conflict has been going on for so many years now without any prospects for peace. Bear in mind that the Middle East, which I refer to as unpredictable, the Middle East, has always gone through cycles of peace and cycles of violence. The cycle of violence every 10 years, followed by an onslaught of a peace process. But in the final analysis, no security, no stability in the Middle East regions. And why so? Because of so many dimensions, so many factors that are complicated, and for its own merit as a geostrategic region, for its oil, for its geographic location, has always been the hotbed of power politics. And of course, when we talk about the international balance of power, the Middle East region has always been a decisive factor. Now, we know for a fact that Europe, the UK, the United States have great stakes in the Middle East for oil, for trade relationships, for manpower, and what have you. So it is always under the focal point of politicians all over the world. Now, I'm not going to talk about British politics vis-à-vis Palestine, because there is a long history there. And that history prompts me to say that the UK even today's government, should shoulder the responsibility, the moral and historic responsibility for what happened in Palestine, especially when they were the mandatory power, and in 1948, when the war broke out, they withdrew before that and left us with this mess. Putting that aside, I go back to our own Palestinian-Israeli conflict. The Palestinians, since the latter part of the 19th century, had made it very obvious that they have the right to self-determination like any other nation in the world. And they have struggled for the last 100 years to attain this concept of self-determination. While we see in history so many countries in the world have achieved their self-determination, yet my country has not seen that. We have been occupied by many powers all along history. We never had the chance to be independent as Palestinians, although in the 20th century, 19th century, we were part of what is so-called the Ottoman Empire. We, as Palestinians today, are aspiring for that same principle, which was espoused by Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States, mentioning that every nation has the right to self-determination. And when I talk about self-determination, in this context, I talk about justice. I talk about security. I talk about democratization. I talk about building our civil society. Try to be part and parcel of this global world, the world of open market economy, the world of democratization and electoral process. This is what I aspire as a Palestinian, to have a state, practicing all these qualities of democracy. Of course, we cannot imitate Western democracy per se, but we could have our own democracy, which I consider to be a neighborhood democracy. Now, the PLO, which is the umbrella organization of all the political factions, have came to a conclusion after 19th Palestinian National Council meetings, which is our parliamentary in exile, and that was in 1988 in Algiers, when they have accepted political accommodation to be the solution to this conflict, and to give up armed struggle, because armed struggle brought nothing except more destruction and violence and destitution to the Palestinian people. And this came in culmination to the first Intifada, where the Palestinians in the occupied territories, after 20 years of occupation, got fed up with no prospects of peace, with no prospects of economic development, with no prospects of security and justice, have revolted against occupation. The crowning of the first Intifada ended up with such a conclusive political stand by the PLO, i.e., recognizing by de facto the State of Israel and accepting UN Security Council resolutions 242, 338, which meant that we can have our independent state on the 1967 borders, meaning West Bank, Gaza, and East Jordan and East Jerusalem. Since 1988, we have embarked on this journey of what is so-called the peace process, where in this journey we have seen many hurdles that we could not overcome because of the systematic policies of occupation by the consecutive Israeli governments, whether Labour or Likud or what have you. We could not have the opportunity of fulfilling our objectives, of being independent, although we have signed the Oslo Agreement in 1994 and thought that interim period will end by 1999, where we will have our own independence over the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. This did not happen. We were stuck at the second redeployment, and then hell broke loose after the Camp David Accords in the year 2000, where there was no agreement whatsoever, And as a result, we were encountered by another bloody second intifada, which led to the destruction of the West Bank, led to the destruction of the peace process, and led to the destruction of any prospects of peace with Israel. By the same token, it has encouraged and boosted the building of settlements, which are considered to be the major impediment today to any kind of a conclusive agreement. You know, with the Oslo peace process, the occupied territories were divided into areas A, B, and C, and I assume I'm talking to a very well-informed audience here, where Area C is almost more than 60% of the occupied territories, where it is considered to be the most fertile land, where all our water aquifers are there, are allocated for the building of settlements, which in general, settlements, comprise 2% of the territories, but the built-up area is more than 58%. So Palestinians are not allowed to build in that area or to have any kind of control. Which means that if we want to talk about a two-state solution, which the international community have accepted and embarked on this peace process to implement that, it will be impossible if Israel could stick all the time in occupying at least Area C. Let alone today, Israel is all over the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and let alone Gaza. Every once in a while, we have naked aggression and war. And Gaza is still under siege by the Israelis. So we are formally under occupation. Let's not kid each other. Because the hot pursuits are continuously going on in the occupied territories. And the government, our police, can do nothing about that. So when we embarked on this peace process, we thought that settlements will stop. But what we have witnessed between 1993 till the year 2000 with Camp David, 7 years, settlements were doubled and the settlers were doubled. Now the settlements are quadrupled between 2000 and 2015. So how can we talk about a two-state solution when today the West Bank is totally divided into 3 major clusters of settlements with no geographic contiguity whatsoever, with East Jerusalem totally isolated from the southern part of Palestine, with the latest development of what they call the E1 envelope. Gaza does not have any corridor with the West Bank. And then still we talk about a two-state solution. I wonder what kind of a two-state solution if we still have more than 400 or 500 military checkpoints all over the West Bank. How can we talk about a two-state solution when we have this wall, which I refer to as an apartheid wall, length 765 kilometers, and built deep 10 kilometers in the West Bank? It's not on the 1949 armistice line. It's in the West Bank. So this has nothing to do with security. It's a political message that will be irreversible. In any kind of negotiations, that wall is going to stay, and that will determine the future borders between Israel and the Palestinians. Now, the current discourse on the Palestinian side, at least the intellectual side, I would say, is that the two-state solution is dead with the Oslo peace process. What are the viable options? What they say is that there is no other option except the South African model: one vote, one man, one vote. Or let me be a little bit sensitive to gender: one person vote, just to be fair. So, if that's the idea, I think Israel, of course, automatically will resist that idea, because that means the end of the messianic dream of political Zionism. One man, one vote means that the demographic balance will be on the side of the Palestinians, i.e. Israel will feel threatened that they will be annihilated with the voting, with a democratic process where the Palestinians will be the majority in the year 2020. But the one-state solution, as far as Israel is concerned, is the fact that Palestinians could maintain the status quo plus, meaning we could collect our garbage and this and that, but we cannot have our political independence, and we cannot control borders. So we're talking about one-state solution in which Israel reigns supreme and the Palestinians are one minority that tends to its own business in the context of Greater Israel. So that's the vision of one-state solution as far as Israel is concerned. Now, my leadership still believes that the two-state solution is doable. It's a workable solution. We can do something about it. But with time and with the extremism that we are seeing in Israel and with the dramatic shift of Israeli society from even the center to the extreme right is not a good indication for any prospects of peace. I am not that optimistic about the current elections that will take place on the 17th of March in Israel, because my readings of Israeli society and my readings of the public opinion polls and how Prime Minister Netanyahu is trying to manipulate the Iranian file, manipulate the threats of Hezbollah, the threats of Daesh, the threats of Hamas, and to derail the entire peace process by focusing on the Iranian nuclear file is something that Netanyahu is using to gain more popular voting within Israel. So for the first time, I can see the top on the agenda of the political platform of such coalition governments is, of course, settlements is there. I mean, as a basic principle that would stay forever. But I will say that they will play on the security issue. That here is small Israel being surrounded by Muslim mongers, by Arab mongers, and by terrorists like the Palestinians. So, the only way to gain popular vote is to vote for such a government. And Netanyahu is trying to play all the cards that he has within the context of an unstable Middle East region. Now, we as Palestinians have tried to go the 9 yards, as we say. We have accepted political accommodation. We have accepted to compromise politically. We have conceded all the way to accept 22% of historic Palestine. We have accepted to embark on a peace process through an incremental approach with the ingenious of the third party, the United States, using methods of confidence-building measures and the incremental approach towards a solution. We have accepted to play that game all the way, and in lieu what we have seen is a total frustration, humiliation on the political level, on the economic level, and we are totally socially dislocated society. Today, Israel knows very well that the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank are sitting on a powder keg. We don't know when the third intifada is going to, only the Saj or God knows when the third intifada is going to take place. But I must assure you that the objective and the subjective conditions synchronized well within a context of frustration is definitely going to lead to violence. And that kind of violence, nobody can control. Although our strategy as leadership, as a PLO leadership, that it should be a non-violent struggle, it should be a civil rights movement, it should be a peaceful struggle, but sometimes you cannot control the people and how they feel when they are totally humiliated, living like wretches of the earth with nothing except the bare minimum to survive. Now this is one scenario. Another scenario I envision on the Palestinian side is the fact that we have no choice except to pursue our participation in becoming members of the international conventions. You know, time and again, we have been always asking to be recognized in the United Nations as a full-fledged government and state. However, we have managed to get recognition of state as observers with 140 countries, let alone today the avalanche of European parliaments are voting to recognize the state of Palestine, but not the governments except to the courageous government of Sweden. Now, this is one symbolic achievement of Palestinian diplomacy. And all these countries believe in the righteousness of our cause. And they believe that we are entitled for a state. We're not stupid people, and we're not beggars. And we don't want charity. All we are asking is our independence and to control our destinies. But when I hear statements coming from the Israeli extreme sides saying that even if we want to give up the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, but we will never let you control the Jordan Valley. And the Jordan Valley, within the 60% of what Israel claims to control, is the borders between Palestine and the eastern side of the Jordan. So that's the only vent for us as a government, as a state, to thrive economically by having an open trade system with the Arab world. So that's our exit to the Arab world. If we don't control that, then we cannot control our economy, then we cannot have political independence. You know, after all, when we talk about political independence, we should be economically free. But if we are totally subservient under the Israeli hegemony and control economically, which we are now, 98% of our consumer goods come from Israel. And if our trade relations with that of the Arab world is totally hampered by the total control of the Israelis, let alone through the Paris Peace Protocol that was signed between Palestinians and Israelis, Israel has the right to collect our tax revenues. And as you can see, this is the third month, almost $500 million have been collected on our behalf. This is our money, our tax money, and totally controlled by Israel, treating us as children. If we behave, we'll get the lollipop. If we don't behave, we don't get the lollipop. And this is causing a lot of financial difficulties. I must say that for the last 2 months, our public sector, which is, the largest bureaucracy since we are under occupation, have not got paid their salaries. So if Israel thinks that such stringent measures of economic strangulation could really make the Palestinians kneel down, they are totally wrong. Because we can still live on bread and za'atar and zayt. We don't need fancy cars, we don't need fancy computers, we don't need these, fancy physical electronics to survive. Although we are one of the most educated in the Arab world. We have the highest educated intellectuals in the Arab world. And I don't want to boast about Palestine and what Palestinians have done in developing the Arab world. It's about time that we have to develop our own country and to have our own independence. And if we cannot be economically independent, we cannot be politically independent. And we cannot continue to be surrogates to Israel, economically, politically, and socially, because that's not the way it should be. Occupation should end, ladies and gentlemen. It is so unfortunate that in the 21st century we are still talking about occupation. And occupation by a country that boasts to be the only bastion of democracy in the Middle East. How could you accept this oxymoron and hypocrisy when they claim to be democratic? Democracy only for the Jews, for the Israelis, and autocracy for the Arabs and the Palestinians. And that cannot really convince wise people like you to believe that Israel could be a democracy and a belligerent occupier at the same time. This is the apex of what I consider the oxymoron in politics. And that should be resisted, ladies and gentlemen, because we cannot really fight alone Israel. We don't have Apaches, we don't have Merkavas, we don't have Cobras, we don't have F-16s, F-18s to fight Israel. If we are fighting Israel, we are fighting Israel with the righteousness of our cause. Because these countries, this country in particular is our country. We have made our painful historic concessions by accepting the state of Israel over 78% of historic Palestine. Can't we have the right to have our own independent state on only 22%? Where is justice? And I'm not talking about absolute justice here. I'm talking about relative justice. And if that is not going to be achieved, I have my doubts about this international community that claims being democratic, developed, and what have you. Because I cannot make the distinction with such thinking with that of autocratic regimes that we have lived in the past and see how they were ruling over the world. If this is a small global village today, the age of openness, the age of cooperation, the age of integration, the age of exchanging knowledge, the age of exchanging ideas, trying to be one small nation all over the world, calling for interdependence and what have you, and still we have narrow-minded, chauvinistic nationalism, ideologies that could lead to nothing except to disaster in our part of the world. I think it's about time. This is a wake-up call. Because things could be worse. We don't have anything against Judaism. I believe Palestine is the cradle of the three monotheistic religions. Islam, or I start with Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We never had any problems, Jews and Muslims and Christians in our part of the world. We still try to encourage interfaith dialogue and debates, and I have been participating in many of these debates. Because monolithic religions are complementing each other, and there is no problem with religion. You know what's our problem? Our problem, we don't make distinctions between Judaism and political Zionism. We don't make distinctions between Islam and Muslims. We have to have clear-cut understandings. Not everyone claimed to be Muslim and commits an act of terror represents Islam, ladies and gentlemen. And here I stand to you as an Armenian, Catholic, Christian. This kind of sectarianism is something which is abhorred in my part of the world. And that's why you're looking at one who is representing Palestine, who is Armenian by ethnic origin, who is Christian by religion, who is Catholic by denomination, who is Palestinian by birth and citizenship, who is an Arab by nationality, and a Muslim by civilization. Can't I be the perfect model of representing such a pluralist society? If that is not the conviction of my people, I wouldn't have been here as an ambassador addressing you at the Oxford Union debate. So we don't have to be bigots in order to prove an ideology and say this is better than that one. That's not the case, ladies and gentlemen. Our struggle with Israel is a total secular struggle. We are fighting for our own independent state. It has nothing to do with religion. But this doesn't negate the fact that religion is becoming a very important, a focal, I would say, a fulcrum in this conflict for the last several years. And when the element of religion comes in the conflict, we have to witness exacerbation of this conflict by having different dimensions of fighting between these two epistemic communities. It is a shame that we are not being realistic enough to understand that our part of the world could be the French Riviera of the Middle East. Imagine. This is the most holy land in the world. We have, as we say, Vivaldi's quartet, the four seasons. We have a beautiful weather. We have excellent services. We have manpower. We have the technology. we have the economic outlook of how to become modern. I'm not saying only we. I'm saying Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. If we talk about another Benelux style of integration economically, look what we can do in that part of the world. We don't need petrol. I believe the oil has ruined the Arab world. It was not a bless, it was a curse. And it seems to us that even our Holy Land is becoming a cursed land. For the last several centuries, we did not have peace in Jerusalem. This is the city of peace, supposedly. Intermittently, we had Christians, Muslims, Crusades, Jews, and what have you, coming and ravaging and controlling and pillaging, and we never had peace in that city of Jerusalem. Although I'm from Jerusalem, I'm from the old city, my house is next to the 8th station of the cross. I'm in love with Jerusalem, but believe me, Jerusalem is sad and gloomy. Jerusalem should be the vibrance of the entire Holy Land. It is gloomy on its eastern part and on its western part. Okay. Since I have a few minutes left, where are we now? Israel thinks that they are in the best shape ever politically. First, they don't care about Europe. They don't care about the Arab world. They are living in this siege mentality, in this fortress that they can defend themselves. They are the most powerful nation militarily in the Middle East. They are totally supported by the United States of America. And of course, their number one friend, strategic friend, is American Congress. And once the Congress is on the side of Israel, the rest are all academic. Because they cannot see any kind of influence. I cannot see any kind of influence this country could have on Israel. Although they could stop trade relations with Israel militarily, which amounts to billions of dollars. They can stop buying settlement products and Israeli products. Okay, that's the only way where you can affect the Israelis, when you hit them in the pocket, but not with polemical discourses of apartheid and this and that, and talking about occupation. They care less. You can talk as much as you want, and this is their concept of democracy, that they are tolerant of being criticized. So the only power that they care for is the United States of America. And let me conclude here, maybe, if you allow me, because I can take more questions and answer. That I was asked one time at Cambridge University why I, that time, was too critical of US policy in the Middle East. I had a question from the audience. But the US has really good relations with the Arab world. I had to answer that question, even if I had to squeeze my brains. And this is what came out from me. I say, my dear friend, imagine, and this is a true fact, not imagination, but you imagine that the United States has a strong relationship with Israel. And I could say that relationship is like a Catholic marriage, no divorce. And I can tell you why, like a Catholic marriage. Because American politics, the decision-making process, is the outcome of the domestic determinants. And I don't want to give a lecture in international relations now, as much as I tell you that the Zionist lobby, with the Christian Zionists that comprise 70 million, have 23% of the electoral vote in the United States. So they could be powerful enough. And when they participate in all kinds of elections, from local government all the way to the presidency, let alone that they have control over media and what have you, and they have 99 organizations, hundreds of charity organizations that contribute to American society, so they have to be effective in the political process. So I say this is a Catholic marriage. Although democracies don't fight each other, but they do beg to differ with each other on policies. But in the final analysis, it's an organic relationship, totally intertwined. Like a Catholic marriage, there is no divorce. But the relationship of the United States with that of the Arab world is a relationship of a lover to a mistress with no strings attached. So where is the commitment? We don't see commitment there. Right? So the geostrategic interest, which makes the United States be greatly involved in the Middle East, is to have the access over oil, is to unequivocally support the state of Israel because of its geostrategic interest in the region, to support proxy regimes that have been a total failure for the last 7 decades. And now what we're witnessing is a dramatic shift in perceptions, yet we have not reached the social revolution like the style of the French Revolution with Rousseau, Condorcet, Diderot, Mirabeau. No, we don't have that kind of a revolution in the Middle East yet. It's not a social one, but it's a shift from the secular notables to the religious notables. And that kind of shift is not enough to have this draconian change in that society, to have at least the vision in the future for our salvation from this traditional neo-patriarchal concepts and moving into the directions of development. We didn't reach that stage. And fourthly, containing communism, which crumbled in 1988, America, to prosper, they had to create an enemy, and that enemy is Islamic fundamentalism, ladies and gentlemen. So these are the 4 cornerstones that beg to differ in terms of implementation between Republicans and Democrats. And I say, when it comes to the Middle East, it's Tweedledum, Tweedledee. Thank you very much. Stuck to my guns? Half an hour? Okay.
Now we have time for a question and answer session. So if you have a question, please raise your hand quite clearly.
Hi, as a born and raised Egyptian, I know that for most, or if not all Egyptians, Palestinian independence is a very passionate concern and one that they wholeheartedly support. How would you, but the debate is how to support Palestine in this transition period and through all this controversy, and how would you recommend Arab countries such as Egypt support Palestine?
Thank you very much. You look Egyptian.
Oh, yeah.
That's why you are very beautiful.
Thank you.
I must say that, you know, Egypt has always championed the Palestinian cause. There is no doubt in my mind that our strategic depth in terms of support is Egypt. Militarily, call it as you like. And you know, Egypt was controlling Gaza until 1967, right? So we have the mixed marriages, we have, the socioeconomic interaction and what have you. And you know how important the Rafah border crossing to the Palestinians living in Gaza, given the fact that all other crossings are totally controlled by Israel, right? We believe that Egypt is Dunya, as we say. It's the mother of all the world. We know for a fact that Egypt stood by us and will stand by us. And they will never relinquish their support to the Palestinian cause, because they consider the Palestinian cause as the mother cause of the Arab world. They assist, yes, they are assisting us. In the international community, they are assisting us. At the United Nations, they are assisting us. The Committee of Progress and Report, Lajnat al-Mutaba'a, they are assisting us. And they are giving Abu Mazen, our president, all kinds of support. Egypt has always been supportive to the Palestinian cause. I cannot say, and I don't want to make distinctions here, but Egypt as a country, as a people, breathes, thinks day and night, not only about their plight, but about the liberation of Palestine. That's my answer to you. Afwan.
If you could just pass the microphone to the lady just
I was just wondering how optimistic you are about the investigation by the ICC in terms of the Israeli war crimes and what you think that will do for the Palestinian future.
Thank you very much. I am by nature optimist. Because, you know, I do believe in what Antonio Gramsci, the Italian philosopher, has taught us. He had taught us that there is always pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the goodwill. Right? Now, the other option that we have, and no other option left for us as Palestinians, is to pursue still the recognition of the state of Palestine in the Security Council of the UN. We will never give up. Every year we are going to resubmit the application until we convince the international community, especially Europe and America, that the West Bank, Gaza and East Jerusalem are not disputed territories. These are occupied territories. That's why we want that recognition. All right? Number two, as I said, we have signed many international conventions. But now, read my lips, 1st of April, we are becoming members of the ICC and the ICJ. And that means we have the right to prosecute all over the world all these war criminals of Israel. And President Mahmoud Abbas has went all the way with this option. And that's why Israel today is trying to penalize us by withholding our tax revenues. We didn't want to go to the ICC, but you tell me, what options do we have when Israel is continuing with the building of settlements, when Israel is conducting naked aggression against our people in the West Bank and Gaza, when Israel is incarcerating, when Israel is killing people who are demonstrating peacefully, like Minister Ziad Abu Ain? What else can we do? How can we plead to the international community? Except to go to these democratic institutions to make them shoulder the responsibility of implementing what they have accepted, which is the two-state solution. I am very pessimistic today when I look at the objective conditions. But I'm always optimist because I have never seen any kind of liberation by people who are fighting for justice are not going to achieve their goal. We shall overcome.
Hi. Don't you think that the PLO took the same road for so long? You told us about all the mistakes that the PLO has done, how we got to the situation we are in now. Why haven't you ever thought of taking the intellectual side in Palestine, of fighting for rights instead of fighting for nationality seriously? Because I don't think that has ever been taken seriously, and that is, as you said, is a genuine solution for the problem.
Listen, we have internal problems, but our main problem is occupation. Nobody says, you know, the PLO or any country is ideal. Don't you think this country has no problems?
Yeah, but the opportunity cost for the path that the PLO has taken has been huge for the Palestinian people.
Yeah, well, you know, but this is a liberation movement, my friend. There are ups, there are downs, but the PLO since '88 have taken one political stand and they never changed. And that is political accommodation, negotiations, trying to reconcile through peaceful means, you know, with that of Israel. But the Israelis have never reciprocated that. Now, when you talk about the intellectual Who is forbidding anybody from speaking their minds in the occupied territories? We have so many factions, and not all factions, agree on the same principles, of how to conduct our peace process. There are many oppositions. You have Hamas per se, as an entity, does not believe in this entire peace process, all right? We never negated Hamas's opinion. That's their opinion. But the PLO, you have always to remember, is the sole representative of the Palestinian people. Now, we have internal issues with our brothers in Hamas, but we cannot really also discard them out of the political game for the simple fact they are part and parcel of our social fabric, of our political structure. We have to factor them in any kind of future relationship. But this has nothing to do with the ongoing peace process with Israel, because the PLO has recognized the state of Israel and embarked on a peace process. Fatah, for example, which is, the majority, which represents the government as a faction, does not recognize the state of Israel, my friend. All right? As Hamas does not recognize the state of Israel. But when we conduct the negotiations, we have accepted the state of Israel by de facto as the PLO, which is the organization that represents everyone, regardless of the internal discrepancies in terms of this recognition. Now, to give you one simple example, I was asked to talk about Hamas and about Hamas being an impediment to the peace process. That's bullshit. Hamas has never been part of the PLO, and between 88, let's say, when we accepted negotiations, until the death of President Arafat, 2004, and before the advent of Hamas in 2006, did we achieve any peace with the Israelis? To talk about impediments and to take Hamas, as an excuse? Hamas was legitimately elected, and we have accepted that legitimacy. And Hamas is an integral part of our society. That's why we have debates now between all the factions, Fatah and Hamas, to reconcile. And Hamas has accepted by de facto the 1967 borders, which means that by de facto they have accepted the state of Israel. And the PLO has, you remember the covenant of the PLO, that have been rescinded, and it has been modified where it says there is the acceptance of the state of Israel. Now, why Hamas is so strong? As long as there is no solution, there could be always a safety valve for opposition. But once we have a breakthrough in negotiations, and once we have our statehood, there is no way Hamas will continue as a mobilizing force in our society. As a matter of fact, they will be part and parcel of a national unity government, part of the parliament, part of the entire political process.
Could you pass the microphone to the gentleman?
Thank you for coming, Mr. Hassassian.
Thank you.
I just have a threefold question, actually. First of all, you talk about how the intransigence of the Israelis in the peace process is, in your view, the main cause of the current inertia in the peace process. Now, my question to you is, why did Abu Mazen not get back to Prime Minister Olmert on the 2008 peace plan? Secondly, you talk about bigotry. Now, everyone knows that the Palestinian Authority is one of the most inciting governments on the planet. So
Inciting government?
Inciting religious hatred often against Jews. So we look at Palestinian textbooks, Al-Aqsa TV, Abu Mazen giving Dalal Mughrabi's name to dance troops in 2012, donating money in his name, naming Palestinian squares in Ramallah, in Jericho, after Palestinian suicide terrorists. And thirdly, I want to ask you about you talk about Hamas not necessarily being the greatest impediment to peace. Now, given that Islamic fundamentalism is rising across the region, Hamas, as you said, they won a democratic election, but the PA refused to recognize it. So you're clearly a very corrupt institution. You don't believe in democracy. And given that Abu Mazen has not held an election in over a decade, it's quite clear that he lacks democratic legitimacy and he's a corrupt leader, despite being, he's on $1 million a month as well. He's got no incentive to negotiate peace. But I want to ask, given that the ideological rift between Fatah and Hamas is so strong now, do you think we could be heading towards a three-state solution?
Okay. I know exactly where you're coming from now. Let me answer you, my friend. First of all, my president is not corrupt. Okay? My president is a democratic, a pragmatic president that you will ever, and Israel will ever meet in the future or in the past. We're not talking about Yasser Arafat, we're talking about President Abu Mazen, who from day one, when he was elected in the year 2005, has put a strategy of nonviolence and total collaboration on security issues with Israel. And since his advent, we hardly have seen any kind of suicide bombings, as you say, coming from the West Bank. All right? Number two, he does not have millions in his accounts, and he does not spend $1 million every month in salary. I don't know from where do you get this information, but it is so unfortunate that, the Zionist propaganda has really... Thirdly, let me tell you this. Hamas are Palestinians. They have religion as their ideology. And they believe in the Muslim Brotherhood ideology of not having a state in Palestine, but all over. It's the return of the caliphate, but different than ISIL. All right? That's their ideology. But you have to understand that they are the most pragmatic. They understand the political game. That's why they have accepted democracy. That's how Abu Mazen and my president have accepted the conducting of elections when the Americans and the Israelis told them, don't conduct elections because the Islamic party, the faction, are going to come into government. He went ahead because he is open and democratic, not because he is authoritarian, as you claim. Dalal Mughrabi and others, my friend, you consider them terrorists, I consider them liberationists.
They blew up buses in 1978 killing civilians. He's a terrorist.
Yes. And my friend, if you want to play this polemical game, how on earth can you justify a democracy like the State of Israel using state terrorism and killing innocent people who have nothing to defend themselves? So let's not talk about terrorism, because Israel is the ultimate state terrorist in the world.
Thank you for your speech. Throughout the 70s and 80s, the Soviet Union and the US often dictated Middle East politics. And now that Russian politics are increasingly clashing with the policies of the US, do you see that coming into play as a changing dynamic in the region?
Well, actually, I think your question is very valid. I think when we had the balance of power, the world was much safer and more secured. We did not have all these fundamentalisms coming to the fore. We did not have all these regional conflicts coming to the fore. It's because of the United States being a unipolar power could not control the situation. I believe the 60s up to 70s and 80s, we were living in a much safer world. Today, with this unipolar mentality, control, the police mentality of the US, we have all kinds of problems. Economic problems, political problems, instability in the Middle East, the rise of extremism and what have you. I could blame the United States for this. It's not only we, as people in the Middle East, are inclined to be undemocratic, inclined to be aggressive and violent. There are reasons, my friend, why we have reached that stage. It's the apex of frustration and humiliation. It's when you have abject poverty, when you have high illiteracy rates, when all that money is controlled in the hands of few, and that controlled by the United States. What kind of development are we seeing in the Arab world? Now, development is not skyscrapers like in the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, and what have you. I'm not talking about that kind of development. I'm talking about social development. Now, the advent of Russia into the political scene, you know, it took them 20 years. It will take another, still 10 or 15 years for Russia to become a power to reckon with again. And I'm not talking on the military level, because Russia has never lost its military might and power. They are still producing nuclear submarines, and they have their power, military power, intact. I'm not talking about that. Not that kind of balance of power. I'm talking about political influence. I'm talking about economics, about the resurgence of the oligarchs now, the resurgence of China economically. These are going to be the potential threat to the United States' geostrategic interests in the Middle East. And if we can see Europe detaching itself a little bit from that of the United States and trying more or less to converge its more interests economically and not militarily, I'm not talking about military power here, with that of the advent of, let's say, China and what have you. Now Russia has a problem. I mean, the Ukraine problem is a big problem. I don't empathize with that kind of policy, all right? But I must say that Russia also is being cornered to use such positions at the Ukraine to tell the Americans that they are power to reckon with and they can be a source of instability. Look, they are supporting the Assad regime. They're supporting Hezbollah. They're supporting Iran, right? And if you consider these are the axis of evil, right, and Russia is supporting them, then this is a message to the United States that, you know, we can also go back to the old school of thought when we were supporting the PLO, the liberation movements and what have you, against your apartheid regimes and what have you. All right? I see major developments coming worldwide. But I will tell you, it has to be positive rather than negative. It has to be not confrontationist, but rather reconciliatory, that the world cannot be controlled by one. It has to be controlled by multi-power system. And that's what I aspire to have, a new international relations based on the multipolarity of powers, where the checks and balances would be the source of development and progress and stability.
Am I allowed to follow up quickly? But you mentioned that Russia is now supporting Hezbollah and the Assad regime. Certainly, that's also not a positive way forward for the Arab region, just as American support of the Saudi regime is also unstable. So what is the positive way forward for the Middle East?
The positive forward in the Middle East is to let these people leave us alone to handle our own problems. I'm not saying Russia is better than America. I'm not trying to put that kind of an assessment. All I'm saying, big power politics have led to the destruction of that region. It's that geostrategic rivalry that jeopardized basically the entire Middle East region. And thanks to God, who gave us oil in order to be in this position. I think without oil, we could have been living much better and happier life, my friend. Nobody likes anybody in this world. You have to be mature to understand that power politics is all about national interest, my friend. All right? Today you are my friend, tomorrow you might become my enemy. What counts is my national interest. And if the national interest today is to oppose the United States by supporting Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran, all right, for them, this is the art of politics.
Can you pass it to the lady in the grey sweater?
Hello, my name is Shira. I'm from Israel. I thank you very much for your speak. I find many of the things that you say interesting and I agree with. I felt offended some parts of your talk, and I support the idea of 2 states for Palestine and Israelis, and I'm going on March 17th to vote and try to replace Benjamin Netanyahu. And I do not agree with building settlements, new settlements in the West Bank. What I would do like to ask you is about the responsibility of the Palestinians to the failures in the peace process, specifically about Gaza. In 2005, when my friends said we should not withdraw from Gaza because Palestinians will be shooting missiles at Tel Aviv, I was telling them that they're being crazy. Palestinians will never do that. They just want a normal country to live in. They want prosperity. They want the French Riviera. Then with then we went out from the Gaza Strip. The Palestinians had democratic elections. Hamas was chosen, and now we see a terror organization controlling Gaza. What is your message to Israel, and how can we be assured that the same thing is not going to happen in the West Bank? Thank you.
First of all, I thank you for thanking me. And I respect you because you are from Israel. And I take your issues very legitimately because this is the concern that you have. I have the same concerns about Israel too. All right? You address your concerns and I address my concerns. The pullout from Gaza was a total recipe for disaster. I was one involved in the negotiations of mutual withdrawal from Gaza. And we were planning it mutually with top brass military in Israel, but Sharon decided basically to pull out. And by pulling out from Gaza, he created there a big vacuum. And what happened exactly is the opposite. Instead of Gaza being independent, Gaza became totally under siege. You have to say the truth. Why people in Gaza have resorted to such kind of resistance? Because they had no other choice. And that choice, whether rightly or wrongly so, I don't approve of rockets, and I don't totally approve, F-16s bombing, people in Gaza. That's wrong too, all right? So it takes two to tango. It takes two to tango. But we have to understand that you cannot equate the occupier with the occupied. And you cannot put both on equal footing. Because if the story is action-reaction, then there will never be any solution to this conflict. We have to understand that we have to move forward. And moving forward, at least, is to put violence aside. I was one of those who believed, regardless, my friend, of suicide bombings, which I totally condemned in my position. You can, my friend, Google me and see how my house was being bombarded by a TOW missile while I was living in my house. If you consider that democracy, then I doubt your morality. We are against this. We condemn violence. Violence is a recipe for disaster. It cannot continue because that's not the solution to this enigmatic peace process. You ask me, my relationship with so many Israelis, with so many professors. I have at least published 15 joint articles with Israelis. My president did not really circumvent me from that because we believe in peace. And all these, you can Google me and you can find my researches and you can see exactly where the Palestinian moderates are standing on this peace issue. This peace issue for us is a strategy and it is not a tactic, my friend. We have dramatically shifted. I'm talking about the PLO. From the idea of violence and armed struggle to the idea of negotiations and peace. And you tell me, what kind of a president who could take it for 22 years? We have been embarked in a peace process and nothing has been delivered except more settlements, more humiliation, more incarcerations, more killings, more wars happening. Still, we did not give up. Still, we're talking about a two-state solution. Still, we're talking about a peace process. My friend, Prime Minister Olmert, had only 3 months before he was quitting his position and before he was being put into court. He knew, Olmert, very well that in 3 months he cannot get, the Knesset and the public opinion in Israel to accept that. President Mahmoud Abbas has accepted Olmert's offer, but it's the other way around. It was not implemented because he did not have the power to do so. That's my answer to you because I just remembered that. So, I do empathize when I see Israeli innocents being killed. These are human beings. And I see many Israeli friends who sent me telegrams in the past, and now they send us texts. They call me and they condemn Israel's acts of violence. I don't address the Israelis as being one monolithic structure where they are all out to kick the Palestinians and kill them. We have a silent majority in Israel. And let me tell you, 70% of the Israelis are for the peace process. And they are for peace with the Palestinians. And they are for two-state solution. And I hope that this government loses, and we have people like centrists coming over, like Herzog, Tzipi Livni and others, to see a dramatic change in Israeli politics, because we still believe that there is a chance for peace. And let's not spoil it. But such governments today in Israel, they have a clear political agenda. And I beg you, you are people of conscience, you are democratic, you have your intellect, and you are free people. Go and vote, because that's the only way we can proceed with the peace process. We cannot proceed with such people. And building more settlements is going really to complicate more the issues. We have accepted, if we have peace, to accommodate those settlements as residents in the occupied territories and live as citizens in the state of Israel. I didn't come here to talk about solutions because the solutions are there. I came here to talk about the political will. If we don't have political will and determination in that the only way out is through peace and through negotiations, then God forbid what I see 20 years down the pipeline. I'm not going to see a united Israel, because there are dissents in Israel about the politics of the current regime. Okay? I cannot see the Palestinians not being united while Israel is mounting its escalation of hatred and aggression and killing. I cannot see the Arab world divided forever. I cannot see 1.8 billion Muslims continue to see the desecration of our holy sites, whether in East Jerusalem or otherwise. I cannot see the United States controlling the world alone for another 20 years. God forbid, if all these conditions are going to take place, then Israel cannot continue to live in a fortress of a siege mentality like a pariah state. Israel has to make its ultimate historic decision, whether to be integrated in this part of the Middle East by accepting the Arab Peace Initiative and the hand of Abu Mazen, who is 80 years old, or decide to opt for confrontation. And I tell you, even Israel has won 5 major wars in the Middle East. Rest assured that Israel and its citizens cannot continue to live in security while the problem of Palestine is still a vibrant problem.
Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for, but please join me in